Hey everyone, welcome to the Figuring Out Fabric podcast, where I ask dumb questions and you get smart answers. And I have a very smart person with me. I have Kellyn, who's been working with databases of all sorts, starting with like Oracle, for the past 2 decades. She's been a director. I'm sure you've done a bunch of consulting, and now you're at Redgate. So you're just all over the place. And some of these things, like I could never manage being a director. So very impressive. And
I couldn't either. Don't worry about it.
no, that's fair enough. Um, all good. And I think you're going to talk to us a little bit about data movement from these kind of legacy or on-prem relational databases, and maybe we'll talk a little about some of the benchmarking I've been doing as I've been trying to like get my arms around Fabric.
I think that's an awesome idea. I know I went through those challenges in my last role, that director role,
Yeah.
that I'm now a part-time consultant for. I know every time I go to a Microsoft event, folks come up to me and go, where do you work now? Because I'm seeing like multiple places on your LinkedIn. Yeah. So I'm still part of the data and AI team, where I used to be the director of data and AI at Silk. And my lead role, the one that I spend most of my time on, is of course the engineer and advocacy role for Oracle and MongoDB and
Right.
MySQL at Redgate.
Yeah. So what have you been dealing with the whole moving data from these existing systems into Fabric and all of that?
It's rather interesting. As we were trying to find out if these relational workloads, because we have to admit, they who get the data wins. It's all about getting the data into Fabric.
Right. Right. It's well, so it reminds me the way I think about it is like the like narrative arc of Linux and Microsoft. Like Ballmer literally called Linux a cancer because they were so against that like copyleft kind of licenses and all that kind of stuff.
Isn't he in charge of a football team though now? I mean,
Something like that. He's probably much
yeah,
happier. Yeah.
yeah. And so are we. It's all right. I said that out loud. Um, we got to talk about that. But yeah,
But no,
I have
like
that challenge now. As you know, I'm at Redgate, and a lot of the folks
yeah.
are like, I spent the last couple weeks migrating and upgrading Oracle environments on Windows. And I even put a blog post on it because I was like, this is an island unto itself.
Yeah.
There's
It's
no
like
real
someone running
support.
SQL on Linux, like
It's
Godspeed. Yeah.
yes, it's painful. I am aware there may not be any team supporting much of it back at
Sure.
Oracle. I know the failsafe group is gone. I've looked for them. They're missing. The rest of people at Oracle may have hunted them down and killed them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it was painful. There were so many bugs. It's so unsupported. All the documentation is for Linux. So you recognize that there is a preferred platform.
Yeah.
And so running Linux, especially in house, and then folks go, so we're going to write a PowerShell script to support this Oracle endeavor with our product. And it's like, no, you're not. The Oracle people will actually bring out pitchforks at this point.
Right.
Yeah. So you have to use the right tool for the job, for the platform that you're working in. And there's a huge percentage of workloads that are sitting in Oracle. We had a massive migration into MongoDB. There are a good another 30% that are sitting in MySQL that nobody knows what they're doing. They got PHP admin behind them, but they're all sitting out there. How are we going to get that data into Fabric? And if you look at the documentation, it's a pretty complex process.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not. Well, so there's a couple things. First, when you said MySQL, it's very much the SQL Server Express of the open source relational databases, right? Like because you run blogs or PHP board and like everybody's spun up. Like I was running LAMP on a thumb drive in high school, right? Because that was the stack. Um, but yeah, it's not easy to get data into Fabric, but the other problem is there's like 10 different ways to do it. There was
Well, there are storage engines, everything.
there was a blog post by James Sarah that I was working off of for my benchmarking where he listed like 10 different ways to get it in there. And it's like, well, which one am I supposed to use? So not only is it challenging, but you don't even know which way is the right way.
And I went through that even when I was trying to do a white paper for SQL Server with Silk, which is my
Okay.
previous, employer, my
Yeah,
current
yeah.
employer part-time, where I
Your
was
side
doing,
chick, your
yeah,
side hustle,
my
whatever.
side gig, where we had SQL Server, and I was trying to bring that data simply into Fabric. I wanted to start with the native database platform.
Yeah.
As I configured it, I was looking through all of the different ways that I could bring this into Fabric. I followed everybody's recommended practices. And the one thing that I found, that I discovered, is that all of the blog posts, when I got to the networking component, the endpoints,
Yeah.
it would state, this is outside of my blog post, but here is the links for the recommended, practices. Follow this document. And each of them referred to a different document, but all of them used the same statement that made me feel that they were using kind of a marketing
Right.
post that was stated, that was said, this is outside of us. And I wasn't surprised because I was at Microsoft for over 5 years. You had the data and AI team, you had the infrastructure team. I had moved my entire team over to infrastructure because we had to learn networking. It was so crucial.
Right.
And if you're in Fabric, you actually have to understand networking if you're going to grab those relational systems outside of there. And that is such a different world. It really is challenging.
Well, even just auth, like, so whenever I was just trying to move CSV files,
Yeah.
I'm not even trying to change data capture on Oracle or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just CSV files. And I struggled a lot because, so if I'm pulling, like, some of the things were simple. The UI stuff made to be friendly to like the Power BI normies, super simple. You can upload. It costs a lot of CPU or CUs, but that's fine. But like, okay, I'm trying to read from blob storage. Well, I had to learn there's like 4 different ways to authenticate with blob storage. You've got your account keys, your SAS, all this kind of stuff. And then there's the URL pattern isn't even consistent because you've got the blob URL and then you've got the like Azure Data Lake, which is a completely different structure. And then you have to figure out how it maps to OneLake. And then you find out like all this stuff inside of OneLake because they announced SQL DBs in Fabric. Everything is like OAuth.
So it's a
And so,
moving target at the same time you're configuring.
yeah, yeah, it's just like it's like knockoff brand ice cream. Like, yes, this tastes like vanilla, but it's not like the brewers kind of, because like there's for all this stuff. I mean, you know this, but like Azure Data Factory, slightly different feature set. SQL DBs in Fabric, slightly different feature set.
Yeah.
And so a lot of your experience transfers, but then there's places where it doesn't. And they have to make these massive documentation articles of like, here's what's in Azure SQL and here's what's in Fabric DB, and like it's hard. It really is hard.
And then if you're doing something like myself where you have multi-platform database, those data sets that you want to bring over from these relational systems,
Yeah.
and they need to use historical Azure Data Factory, not Fabric Data
Right,
Factory,
right, right. Yep. The
to
OG.
use
Yep.
those connectors, because the connectors don't exist yet. You have to like do this multi-step process, kind of this multi-hop process
Yeah.
between the actual services to connect in. That can be really complex for most customers. They're like, well, everybody's telling me I need to use Fabric Data Factory. Well, you can, but you need to have Azure Data Factory still for the connectors. As the connectors need to be built, many of them are doing it for the popular things, the popular kids on the block, I like to call them.
Yeah.
I'm going to do Snowflake. I'm going to do Databricks. And it's like, that's not where all the data is. The data is still sitting in SQL Server, in Oracle, in MySQL. That's where all the data is. So if you're ignoring two of those because only SQL Server is getting the love, all of a sudden you're not getting all of that data and you're not going to be the winner.
Well, and part of that is like you're right, like Databricks and Snowflake is getting all love, but those are analytical databases for the endpoint. Like
It's
no one
easier
in their
too.
right mind is going to be running an accounting system on Snowflake. That's not what it's for, right? Like
No.
no one's going to run their business on, they'll analyze their business, but like,
Unless you
the,
talk to the Snowflake guys, they'll tell you yes, they do.
Look, I had to support Dynamics Great Plains as a DBA for like a number of years, okay? I had to migrate data from SQL Server to MySQL, okay? It is not an easy task. It is not a simple task.
No, 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 it
Now,
isn't.
I do have a question about this because I know this has been like, the past 5 or 10 years of your career, but I thought Oracle and Microsoft products were oil and water. So why are people moving data from Oracle to Fabric? I thought like, West Side Story, like they're not allowed to touch.
I have preached this forever. All the data is an ecosystem. It
Yeah,
interacts
agreed.
constantly. I have always been multi-platform. If you go over to the Oracle side, they'll say she's betrayed us.
Yeah,
She's
yeah, yeah.
always done SQL Server. She's always done MySQL. I built out and migrated my first Oracle database to a sharded MySQL, and I say MySQL or MySQL because
Yeah,
that tells how old school you are when you say MySQL, by the way. I created and worked on a sharded MySQL system way back in 2010, 2011
yeah.
from Oracle, from an Oracle data mart. We, I've worked on SQL Server since it was SQL Server 6.5. So I've always been multi-platform. When we were working at Oracle, I had only been there for about 4 months, and I just came to my boss. I said, "You need me to move them?" And he says, "What do you mean?" I said, "If the Oracle databases don't move to Azure, none of us are going to have Azure projects because all of it has to move together. The network is our last bottleneck. It is a
Right.
painful, painful one. Yes, Express Route, Fast Connect, whatever you're calling it for whatever cloud vendor and everything else, whatever they want to call it, it helps, but it's expensive. And multi-cloud, if you're not doing it right, it can be really painful. I know of customers that were shifting around 7 terabytes of data every single day between
Yeah.
clouds, and they
Yeah.
came to a screeching halt. It does not work. So put your data where you're working on it.
Well, and the movements faster. Like I'm so naive because so when I did the benchmarking, I made sure to generate the data in a VM in the East US 2 data center because that's where my Fabric tenant was, right? But I'd
Your
never done
fabric?
this kind of
Oh, you're doing better. Mine was in Europe when I was working with it. Oh, you're doing good.
the joys of being like a one-man shop. And I was like, okay, I need to generate there because I pay for fiber, but it's home, so I get like 50 megabits or whatever. I'm happy with that. But whenever I was doing like AZ copy, it was like 5 gigabits. And I'm like, oh, this took 45 seconds to move 195 gigabytes of data. I
Yeah.
see why they do this now. I see, it's like you underestimate like the orders of magnitude from being co-located.
This goes back to old school when we were doing SCP on files between Linux servers.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
There's sometimes the oldest way of doing things is the best. AZ copy has a lot of power, a lot of power. I mean, the AZ commands that we were doing with bash scripts when we were at Microsoft, that's the way we lived.
Yeah.
That's the way we lived. And again, when we start doing all these transformations and using Azure Data Factory, that can be painfully slow too. Customers were coming to us, they were saying, how can I even get my data in Fabric if I have petabytes sitting inside an Oracle database?
Oh,
And you
sure.
expect me
Jeez.
to actually have this perform? How do I do this in a way that's going to make sense? I had somebody come to me from Microsoft just within the last week asking me if they could use Golden Gate. And I actually moved in the Azure Data Factory because the network latency that they had from where their Golden Gate instance was and their Oracle database to Azure was not going to fly. They could not get it in Fabric. No way, no how.
Yeah.
So you have to always look at that. Some of the biggest latency issues where we were brought in for performance challenges were often dependent on where the service sat within the Azure data centers and where the VM sat and where their actual data was sitting. You had to look at it all. Yeah.
So a learning question for you. So because I've been starting to dig into this stuff, I'm starting to like some of these pieces about data engineering is starting to click, right? I'm starting to actually understand the difference between a lakehouse and database and all that kind of stuff. But what you're describing very much sounds like IT with a data accent, as opposed to necessarily what we think about when we hear data engineering. And so, like, can you talk about that a little bit? Because it seems like people who have to deal with this sort of stuff are going to have to deal with a whole set of skills that they maybe even atrophied. Like for me, it's been 3 or 4 years since I've done anything in the Azure portal meaningfully, because I'm all Power BI, software as a service, and Fabric's supposed to be the same way, but you have to get the stuff in there. And so suddenly I'm spinning up a VM, or I set up Azure Data Factory for the first time, right? I didn't end up testing it because at a certain point it felt like three card Monty, like where are we moving the compute costs? But other people are going to have to for reasons that you said. So what does this role or this learning look like? Because I think people have been weaned off having to worry about hardware, right?
I don't think you can get rid of the hardware ever. You're going to have something in your environment that sits outside of a service capability that's within that cloud. The cloud is there to serve the standards.
Yeah.
And every place that I've worked, there's been something that somebody first started designing underneath their desk that ended up in the data center that now needs to go to the cloud. And you need to find a way to support it because it's mission critical. I've made a career of that. Let's start out with that.
Emergency productionization. I saw it a lot at my last
Yes.
job, right?
Yeah.
Hardware gets field promoted. Yeah.
And what we were considered as Oracle on Azure, we were data infra specialists. When people would bring us in, we actually knew how to troubleshoot the infrastructure as well as the data layer. It was everything. And it gave me a lot of great experience and allowed me to pretty much troubleshoot anything you threw me into. Other than networking was still a hurdle. And even with the endpoints that I dealt with when we were setting up Fabric, and that was really challenging for me. But I had still enough experience to know how to do network sniffing across to the service and back, and found out where my connections were even breaking. That's a lot of expertise that you're expecting from individuals that many times are saying anybody can connect Fabric, anybody can use it. There's a lot there. End to end, you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, even the stuff that's supposed to be simple, like setting up an on-premises data gateway that's supposed to handle a lot of that stuff for you. Well, the problem is whenever you can't connect to a source, a lot of people don't have those troubleshooting skills.
Yeah.
Like I worked more in IT at my last job, or to a certain degree, and so I was used to, okay, we set something up on this server, it's not connecting. Well, I'm going to go on, and I don't have SMS, so I'm going to make a .udl file and save it as a text file, and then like edit it so I can try testing a connection. Or I don't know if you ever had the misery of dealing with SharePoint on-prem, but
I did.
yeah.
DOP1, but go ahead.
Well, then you probably know this, but like, I forget the exact internals, but it saves the SQL Server name internally. It hard codes it. And so if you want to do a migration,
Yes.
you don't get to just change the setting. You go onto the SharePoint server, open up SQL alias, and do basically a DNS redirect. You lie to it about where the server is.
There's Oracle software that does the same thing. Yes.
Yeah, and so like you kind of, Scott Hanselman talks about like these layers of abstraction, right? And you learn that way. Okay, let's go below the layer of abstraction. Or I supported enough weird stuff that I'd have to like open up Procmon or Regmon or whatever to see what a piece of software was doing, because we didn't have documentation or we didn't have support for it. And so we'd see like, what is it doing? You open a Wireshark and say, where is it talking to? And yeah, I worry that a lot of these skills have atrophied for folks, because like I love Power BI, but you get used to software as a service until it's suddenly not software as a service anymore. And now you have to learn infrastructure as a service, and you're in trouble.
This last week, I was talking about working with Oracle with Windows. And I haven't worked with Oracle and Windows for years. And I had to go into the registry to do a comparison of 2 Oracle installations to figure out what hadn't registered in the Oracle inventory, then trace it back to find out that the MySQL installation on the same box had grabbed a hold of the Java files and was holding them hostage. But it took me a while to bring all that back into my brain and understand that and accept it, because all of a sudden on Windows, everything's running as services. We don't have services, well, we're not using services the same way on Linux. But everything's process-based, and you don't have a registry. There's all these things that you have to think about. That's a really powerful point of realizing that OS levels, the services, cloud versus on premise, all of that changes everything that you're working with, and being able to switch your brain
Yeah.
to manage that and really troubleshoot it. Nothing can be off the table. You must be able to kind of, I'm going to use this word that I used for my podcast early in the week. You have to be able to pivot. We have to
Yeah.
be able to just adjust, pivot, turn the corner, and be able to pick up what we're dealing with at that moment and figure out what is broke.
Yeah, I mean, I think, have you ever heard the wolf in Alaska analogy for troubleshooting, for debugging?
No.
So in my course, I talk about it a little bit, but it's like from 1982, but someone described the way that you troubleshoot code, and it's true for this other stuff, is the same way you find a wolf in Alaska. Alaska is a big state. It's 6 times the size of the UK, where you build a fence down the middle, and then you wait to hear which side the wolf is howling on. And then you do it again, you do it again. You bisect the problem, but you have to
Small
learn
bites.
to think
Yep.
that way. How do you know which side of the fence? Is it on the VM, or is it in the network, or is it in the service? But then also, you have to get really, really good at saying, well, how do we know? How do we know for sure? And like, I'm
Do
sure,
not assume, take the data,
yeah,
move a step forward, and just
yeah,
keep
I need to
moving. Yeah.
prove that this is the problem. And how can I do that? Because I'm sure you've dealt with too many people with too much bravado in your life. But IT folks, a lot of them, especially like consultants, they're like a bulldog. They get hooked on this is the root cause.
It's his code. His code is why it's performing poorly. And I'm like, if you don't have the data to prove that, we're
Yeah.
not even going
Show
down
me
that
the
path.
log, show me the numbers, right?
Yep.
Well, because like I'm trying to pivot into performance tuning, and performance tuning is all like I describe it like isolate, measure, and modify. Well, you have to measure. You don't know if you made it faster. Like sometimes you do stuff and it makes it worse. So the only way you know is if you have a baseline. Like that's the only way.
I have come into situations, even at Microsoft, where they were like, we shut off what we call automatic workload repository. We have no historical performance data in the Oracle database. It's running on Azure. We shut everything off. Something happened. It's performing poorly. And people, of course, in the room is like, this changed or that changed. How do you prove that? Well, we can't. Then we're starting from ground zero.
Yeah, right.
You
Yeah.
start from
You
here.
bought a
And we
you bought a lemon and now you need to fix it because you don't know who owned it before.
So
Yep.
we put into place recommended practices. You check everything and you say, did this help? And it was funny because it was a missing recommended practice was the challenge that caused them the performance issue. It was the network too. It was that the VM went up on the opposite side of the data center from where their application server was.
Oh, sure,
Got
yeah.
them close in proximity placement groups. Everything performed well again. But because I had optimized with the recommended practices and I had optimized their workload, they got a much better performing system when I was done. And
Yeah.
you can only hope for that in the end.
Well, and I worry about this too because like I talked about, okay, we've got IT folks like myself where their skills have atrophied because we moved to the cloud and we moved to software service.
Yes.
But then like I did a Ask Me Anything on the Power BI subreddit yesterday. And it was funny because someone's like, what's your off the record opinion on Fabric? And I'm like, well, it's a good thing there's no Microsoft employees actively watching this because like there is, Alex Powers is great. But I said like, they've got this grand ambition. Like you are really hoping that you can take people who are using Power BI desktop and get them using data flows and visual SQL queries on hundreds of gigabytes of Parquet files. They might do it. It's possible. But I can promise you.
But with that, here's a question for you. Who is going to create those Parquet files from all of those relational databases where there's a ton of data? Because I'm like, am I just BCPing all this data out? Am I doing SQL Loader and getting it out?
Yeah.
Am I dumping it into dump files and then turning it into Parquet files? This is the thing I don't understand with the lack of connectors right now in Fabric, that they are so isolated and so many of them are marked as, nope, don't exist in Fabric
Did
data
you
sets.
did you see the announcement about the whole open mirroring thing?
I do, but unfortunately,
You
it's
still have to
not
write it yourself.
relational systems
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I'm working on.
No, I
that are
get it. Yeah, it doesn't help
data.
you. It's just interesting. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, and that's well, and that's always been a challenge with Microsoft is like sometimes they pretend they're the only game in town, and we saw
I
this on
spent
the
5
Power
years
BI
with that.
side.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we saw this on the Power BI side because early on, you had things like direct query, and it was mostly just it was it was Microsoft sources, and then
Yep.
whatever cloud databases were intimidating enough they felt they had to support. So like Snowflake and I think like SAP HANA and stuff. And like over time on the Power BI side, the connector support's gotten better, the direct query support's gotten better. But I mean, I tell people if you want the best experience, it should be something owned by and made by Microsoft because integration's easy when it's vertical integration. You control all the parts. But like you said,
Yeah.
like I don't know if there ever was a time where everyone was just running on one one database system, right? Like at my last job, we were mostly SQL Server, but again, sometimes you need MySQL or something else to run it.
Either vendor choice, because vendors come in and say, I only run on Oracle, I only run on
Yep.
MySQL, or I only run
Yep.
on Oracle, I only run on SQL Server. Or they may come in these days and go Postgres, and I'm only running on these flavors of PostgreSQL. You feel that pressure that you want to be on a supported platform for that vendor product. So that's going to drive that decision. We now have where I joke about everybody's Team Kellyn, everybody's multi platform, because you now not only have your open source databases with your enterprise level paid licensed databases inside their data centers, but also usually one or two flavors of cloud databases
Yep.
included as well. It has become multi-platform everywhere. I am not a rarity anymore. I am everywhere.
I was dealing with this with some consulting I was doing because for a while I was able to stick to mostly just for Power BI consulting, Microsoft owned data sources. And I did a performance tuning gig for people where their data was in Postgres, like AWS Aurora. And you talk about weirdness. So one, I had to learn some Postgres, which was challenging because it's like learning Portuguese if you know Spanish. The words sound similar, but you're like, wait, there's no clustered index. Wait, wait, a table scan is good, right? Just all this stuff. You're like, that was the bad word. You used the bad word. Um, but then you talk about the integration and the support. So something I learned the hard way is if you use direct query against Snowflake and Postgres and you read the logs, so you hook up Profiler, hook up DAX Studio, and you
Yep.
read the SQL that it emits in the event log, it is not Postgres SQL. It is T-SQL. So me thinking I'm clever, I'm like, oh, DAX Studio says it's running this code. Let me run this SQL against the source. Why isn't this working? Well, because it was emitting T-SQL and then rewriting it somewhere into Postgres. And it was awful because I didn't have access to Aurora. So literally, like, and I didn't know the best way to set up logging for that kind of stuff. So literally, I had two options and they were both miserable, but this is more of a me problem. I would either run the slow queries from Power BI and then scatter over to my script to run, see what processes were running. I was basically doing like SP who is active, but for
Yep.
Postgres. Or I got a local copy, a dev copy of the database set up locally, and then I had full access. But it's rough, and you find these edge cases that no one talks about Postgres for Power BI, and so who knows what edge cases you run into? It's very challenging.
It's a good blog post, though.
It's on the backlog. It's on the backlog. All right, so I think we're at a good spot to kind of wrap up here. This has been awesome. This has been fun. So
Thank you.
what is so going through the questions, we'll start with what is your favorite Fabric feature?
My favorite Fabric feature, I have to admit, is getting what they're calling Azure databases in there.
Yeah,
SQL,
yeah, yeah.
Azure SQL, SQL Server 2025. I keep hearing people refer to it different ways because, it's not really out yet. It's, I like to call it it's not GA, it's private preview right now.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But
Yep.
I really love that idea. I've been saying for, well, since it was Fabric wasn't GA, that they needed a relational database as part of
Yeah.
this. They couldn't just have a data warehouse, and they've now brought that about. So I'm very happy to see that. I don't think I had SQL Server on my bingo card, but I'm all about that. I'm good.
Yeah.
So
I
I've
don't know.
had, that's my
I don't know if you
favorite.
saw the announcement. So Rune confirmed at Ignite with Reza that they're working on Cosmos DB and Postgres as well.
Postgres is an excellent choice. Cosmos DB, I'm going to be totally honest here because we're allowed to be totally honest here.
Yes, it's a safe space.
It's Cosmos DB is just, I know they want globally distributed databases and they want a solution for it, but Cosmos DB does not impress me in one shape
Yeah,
at
yeah.
all.
They
At all.
wanted they want their MongoDB drop in. Yeah.
They do. They do. Then just have MongoDB. This idea that you're going to be able to corner this market on that, just pull in MongoDB
It
and
was the
give me
same way with Azure Event Hubs. Like I did a Pluralsight course on it, and you could tell they're like, we need our Kafka competitor. Anytime that they have like over the wire like compatibility, but it's very limited, both with
yeah.
like the Mongo and the Kafka stuff, you're like,
They start
yeah,
to create something and the actual enhancements just come to a stall.
yeah,
Stop it. Just either buy, they got the money, either buy the product that's already built that has all the features in it. Stop creating something that you never invest in that
yeah.
stalls and you have
That's
customers
that's the
using it that don't
problem,
get what they
right?
need.
It's like I said, it's those knockoff brand ice cream of data technologies, and that's the
Yes.
weird thing, is Microsoft has this crown jewel of SQL Server. They've got
Yes.
stuff. They've got good stuff, but then they make all these weird seasonal flavors of their data technologies, and you're like, do we need KQL? Is there a reason we made a whole new querying language? Maybe.
Oracle already has a globally distributed database that was their sharded system. They are going full force into this. They're saying, we're going to move RAC, we're going to move DataGuard into this. This is our next level. That
Yeah.
makes total sense. Why can't you do that with SQL Server?
Yeah.
Create a
Yeah.
sharded system, build it into a globally distributed database. You're done. Do not create another database platform and call it Cosmos DB. Just stop.
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, you're gonna top back on real quick. What's your least favorite feature of Fabric?
Least favorite feature of Fabric is that it is so disjointed right now and disconnected, and many of the features do not work.
Yeah, I I do not envy the team.
Yeah.
There's rough edges to work through. There's a lot of stuff in preview, but even as an educator, they've got such a training lift because they're trying to cover such a broad base of people. Like, how in the world can you make a training that is both applicable to someone in data science and accounting? Like, how are you supposed to do it? I do not envy the people who have to manage Microsoft Learn and all that stuff for this. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. It is. I also want to see better data governance in it. I want some control over my data. I don't want it to become a swamp.
Yeah.
A data lake to stay a data lake. Yeah.
Yeah, the workspace approach worked when it was just Power BI stuff, but now that we're putting like the whole kit and caboodle, like we need some more management. So that makes sense.
They're at least on top of that, I believe. They see that. They see that. And I give them a lot
Yeah,
of
no, I
credit.
believe it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything new to them. So where can people find you? I know there's like 12 different social media networks these days.
I'm always DBA Kevlar.
Yeah.
I may be going through a rebrand.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see. I've been DBA Kevlar since 2008, so it's been a long time
I think
coming.
Patrick's still Patrick DBA. So
Yeah.
it feels like the whole thing like whenever you make a username when you're 12 and you're stuck with it. Yeah. Well, it's funny too because like outside of work, no one calls me Gene. No one. But I'm like, oh, we're doing cool handles, and I'll make a pun with my name. And then I just didn't really think too hard about it, like, oh, Gene is a name, and so yeah. But I made an LLC. It's too late for the rebrand.
Yeah, people still call me Kevlar in multiple platforms, multiple
Yeah.
communities, and everything. And I'm DBA Kevlar no matter. I still am on Twitter. I keep saying, I'm going to leave, and somebody drags me back. But
Yeah.
on LinkedIn is probably my most powerful platform for social media. I'm on Blue Sky. I don't do much out there, but
Yeah.
I'm DBA Kevlar everywhere.
Very cool. And then lastly, do you have anything to promote? I mean, I know you work at Redgate and work in every single product team. You're
Yeah,
probably the
we're
janitor too, from what it sounds like.
I am busy at Redgate. I'm having so much fun there because they I feel needed, and
They
I love
value you.
that.
Yeah, no,
I,
when we talked at Summit, I could hear it in your voice. Like, I'm happy for you, sincerely.
the amount of products involvement that I have with their Oracle product, the stuff that we're doing now we're getting into MongoDB and MySQL, AI stuff. It just keeps me engaged. I
It's
love
an
all the
exciting
things
time
we
to be
do.
around, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Well,
awesome. It's an awesome set of teams that I work with. I mean, just from end to end, love it. And of course, the advocates. I mean, it's Steve Jones and Grant Fritchie and Ryan Booz. How can you be upset about that?
I don't know. He gives me too many massages without asking. I'm a little worried about Steve, but otherwise, he's a good guy. Very cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for your time, Kellyn.
Thank you. It's been great. Thanks.